Monsieur le Chancelier, je vous présente l'honorable Juanita Westmoreland Traore. Sa vie incarne le dévouement à l'accès à la justice et la passion pour la justice. Elle a été la première personne d'origine africaine à être nommée juge au Québec, à la Cour du Québec. Elle a également été la première personne d'origine africaine à être nommée au poste de doyen ou de doyenne dans une faculté de droit au Canada à l'Université de Windsor. La juge Westmoreland Traore détient un diplôme en droit de l'Université de Montréal ainsi qu'un doctorat d'État de l'Université de Paris II. Pendant les années 70, alors qu'elle pratiquait le droit à temps partiel, elle enseignait également à l'Université de Montréal. Elle s'est jointe plus tard au département des sciences juridiques de l'Université du Québec à Montréal, devenant ainsi l'un des premiers membres du corps professoral. La juge Westmoreland Traore a travaillé sans relâche à la défense des droits du public, notamment à titre de membre du conseil d'administration de l'Office de protection des consommateurs du Québec, comme commissaire pour la Commission canadienne des droits de la personne et comme première présidente du Conseil des communautés culturelles et de l'immigration du Québec. En Ontario, elle a été la première commissaire à l'équité en matière d'emploi. À l'étranger, elle a siégé au conseil d'administration de Africa Educational Trust en Afrique du Sud, a fait des missions d'observation en Haïti et a travaillé dans ce pays comme conseillère juridique pour la Commission de justice et vérité. Elle est bien connue dans le milieu communautaire depuis de nombreuses années, particulièrement au sein de Centraide Montréal et du Fonds d'action et d'éducation juridique pour les femmes, Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, LEAF. Officière de l'Ordre national du Québec, elle a reçu de nombreuses distinctions, notamment du Barreau du Québec et de l'Association du Barreau canadien. En 2017, le Barreau de l'Ontario lui a décerné un doctorat honorifique. Judge Westmoreland Traore has strong connections to McGill's Faculty of Law, where she recently taught a Focus Week elective course on the social context of sentencing. She has acted as a mentor and source of inspiration to generations of law students and law professors in our faculty and others, including young men and women of color. In 2012, our Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism held a two-day conference in recognition of her steadfast commitment to equity. It's an honor to pay further tribute to the deep impact she has had locally, nationally, and internationally in making our institutions more inclusive and responsive to the needs of those they serve. Mr. Chancellor, I present to you the Honourable Juanita Westmoreland Traore so that you may confer on her the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa.
I now invite Judge Westmoreland Traore, a colleague and friend for more years than either of us would like to count, to deliver the convocation address. Judge Westmoreland Traore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chancellor. Chancellor Meehan, Principal and Vice Chancellor Suzanne Fortier, Mr. Panda, Chair of the Board of Governors, members of the Platform Party, friends, proud parents, guests, and most of all, the graduating class of 2018. I'm very honored to address you this afternoon, but I want to begin by saying that if I have received this honor and other honors which have been mentioned this afternoon, it's because of the strong support, encouragement, and love of my family, my community, the broader community, and students such as yourselves. I'm happy, in particular, to be here this afternoon for the reasons given by Chancellor Meehan and the Vice Chancellor, because I've had the experience to know some of the graduating class more directly during courses and as an invited lecture. So this is special to me. I know how special it is to you, and I thank you for inviting me. Congratulations on this very momentous event in your life. I know you worked very hard for this achievement, and you deserve every moment of the day. Both you, your parents, and your significant others. I'm proud, too, that my family is here. My husband, Ismail Traore, who's one of the most patient persons in this world. My uncle, Dr. Randolph Estwick, a fellow of the American College of Physicians, obviously, and family, who traveled from New York to be with us here. He knew my father very well, and so it's significant that he's here in a way in the stead of my dad. My dad was very special. He would encourage me, but also he taught me that whether as a minority or racialized girl in Quebec or as a girl simply, I should never be discouraged and that I could do what I would desire provided I worked hard. He was before his time, especially considering the condition of women. So I'm surrounded also by my mother, for whom I'm very grateful, my two sons, and my nephew Tafare, an aspiring lawyer. May I say that my son Mangali is a McGill graduate, class of '94, but I'll just say science. So he strayed. You must savor and enjoy these moments because it goes downhill from here. No, that's not what it is. Rather, experience tells us that your professional career will be filled with ups and downs, and there may even be moments when you question whether you should have studied law. But I say to you, if your message is clear, if your purpose is defined, and if you hold fast to your principles and work steadily toward your goal, you will succeed. You're now fully qualified, except for a little detour called the bar school, like Col du Barreau. You are fully qualified to make important decisions concerning your future. Cette cérémonie de convocation est une période pendant laquelle vous pouvez reconsidérer vos ententes, votre compréhension et vos principes. Pendant les moments de crise, nos buts et nos objectifs deviennent plus importants et aussi ils deviennent plus définis et plus clairs. Chacun de vous doit décider aujourd'hui et demain quel sera votre objectif ultime. Pour certains, c'est plus clair que pour d'autres. It was always clear, perhaps for me, and in this way, perhaps simpler, because as a Canadian and a Quebecer, and as a woman of African descent, my destiny was intertwined with the emancipation and equality of Afro-descendants, both in Canada and abroad. As you know, this decade, 2015 to 2024, has been declared by the United Nations for the international community as a decade recognizing that people of African descent represent a distinct group whose human rights must be promoted and protected. Around 200 million people identifying themselves as being of African descent live in the Americas. Many millions more live in other parts of the world outside the African continent. Progress occurs through the coalescence of forces of all of goodwill in a timely and purposeful manner, necessarily under enlightened and consensual leadership. Mes grands-parents des deux côtés étaient nés en Guyane. Mon grand-père paternel avait une épicerie ici dans la petite Bourgogne. À ce moment, on disait Saint-Henri, avec un salon de coiffure en arrière. Et j'ose dire, il y avait d'autres activités qui se tenaient également en arrière. Il avait aussi, selon ce qu'on m'a raconté, une ferme dans la région de l'Ottawa. Et quand j'étais petite, il semblait que je montais à cheval. Je n'ose plus le faire, mais à ce moment, oui. He sponsored my dad, who began by making deliveries in the freezing cold, to which he was not accustomed. My maternal grandmother was a teacher in Guyana, but had no choice but to do domestic work when she arrived here. She sponsored my mom in 1928. Like other immigrants, they struggled daily, along with other family members, friends, and neighbors, to feed and educate their children. Education was all important. Religion was also central, a militant and syncretic religion, grounded in service to community, welfare, and security. You've probably noticed how so many soul singers, jazz, and popular singers got their first training in the Black church. The experience of my family in a segregated job market was not unique to African Canadians, but shared by many other immigrant communities. Housing was also problematic, with overt discrimination. To a greater degree, and before my ancestors arrived, it was the experience of First Nations people in Canada. What was not common with many others, however, were the racist taunts, even assault, which I experienced personally from little boys mainly, calling me names and throwing rocks as I went to school and later on my way to work on the avenue where I was born. I won't tell you when I was born, but I am a child of the 60s, a part of the civil rights movement, a period of marching, praying, sitting in, organizing, boycotting, confrontation, unarmed students, pastors, others of goodwill, black and white, although predominantly black, battling against outwardly racist and vicious attackers, policemen, and vicious dogs. Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of nonviolence and non-cooperation when necessary, the inspiration of the Christian Southern leadership movement of Martin Luther King, Reverend Martin Luther King, which I would someday like to talk more about, taught us in his sublime simplicity, Mahatma Gandhi did, and I quote, that non-cooperation with evil is as much a duty as cooperation with good. This was his declaration during a trial at Ahmedabad, March 10, 1922. As students, some of you demonstrated and raised consciousness about access to higher education or sexual harassment on university campuses, published reviews, or convened press conferences and organized. Some of your leaders were arrested and jailed temporarily. You may have learned that in the 60s, student leaders were not only jailed, but also threatened and unfortunately some killed. A recent film by James Baldwin, I Am Not Your Negro, bears viewing for the poignant story and witness that he gives. Today, the emergence of movements such as Black Lives Matter here in Montreal reflect the condition of some racialized minorities which continue to be over-policed, arrested, jailed, and punished disproportionately. A condition again chronicled by a young Montreal author, Robin Maynard, Policing Black Lives, State of Violence in Canada. This is a Fern publication, 217. Unfortunately, in some countries, brothers are sometimes jailed at time of arrest and sometimes basically lose their life. An authoritative work is obviously Professor Dave Austin, Fear of a Black Nation, Race, Sex, and Security in the 60s, Montreal, published in 2013. Those of you who have studied criminal law analyzed cases which declared recent sections of the narcotics legislation imposing minimum sentences, that they are cruel in some instances, cruel and unusual, and therefore against our charter and unconstitutional. But these laws increased the prison population of Afro-descendants from 1970 to 1995 here in Canada by tenfold, as documented in the Report on Systemic Discrimination in the Ontario Criminal Justice System. It is not possible for me to continue as if I'm in a lecture hall, but I did want to raise these important matters with you and leave them with you. The Quebec Human Rights Commission published a report on racial profiling in Quebec, which concerns educational institutions, health, housing, and justice. And one of your professors, Professor Blackett, was a member of that Human Rights Commission at the time. Recommendations of the Bastarache Commission on the appointments process of provincially appointed judge pointedly addresses underrepresentation of minorities in the Quebec judiciary, incorporating several recommendations of the submission of the Quebec Bar Association. In the 70s here in Montreal, during the FLQ trials, women marched for the right to be members of juries. We were told that jury duty was a burden and women should be spared. Other women won amendments to the Canadian Criminal Code eliminating the strictures of therapeutic committees. We marched for the rights of Chantal Daigle and other women to obtain timely and safe abortions. Your parents will remember the occupation of the computer center at Sir George Williams University, now Concordia University, where 8 Black students protested disparate treatment that they alleged against a professor whom they accused of racist practices. I was one of the attorneys, and we represented many of the 100 students arrested, including minors who appeared in youth court. In a recent, well, not so recent now, Supreme Court precedent, RDS, the Supreme Court of Canada revised the standard for impartiality, declaring that the reasonable approach of bias refers to a reasonable person who is presumed to be knowledgeable of the history of endemic racism in certain communities. Recent debates in Montreal concerned the removal of the name of General Amherst from Amherst Street because of his recommendations to massacre First Nations people by contaminating blankets to be offered to them. I believe understanding this history precedes and assists the reconciliation process by allowing the parties to more fully understand the hurt and injustice suffered by victims. Most reconciliation processes are founded first on truth-telling, or truth and justice, as in the Haitian Commission. Truth itself is a remedy, restoring honor and dignity to survivors and their families maligned as agitators or foreign agitators, which we were considered, political dissidents, subversives, or even traitors. While progress has occurred on many fronts, including the diversity which I observe in our colleges and university and among those here in the graduating class, diversity on all grounds, genders, gender identification, the broadening of international internships incorporated in school and higher education programs, there still remains many sites of inequality. More awareness now occurs for people who suffer invisible handicaps, for people who are gay, lesbian, transgendered, or bisexual persons, queer persons, or persons who identify differently. But there is also greater awareness of the marginality of those who suffer multiple grounds of discrimination. As you know, our fundamental rights are more often assaulted today: freedom of opinion, freedom of the press, freedom to demonstrate, freedom to organize. Professor Thomas Pritchard, a French professor at l'École d'économie de Paris, a fait la démonstration que les écarts dans notre société, écarts de bien-être et de richesse, ils croissent plutôt que décroître. He concluded that the spiraling of the high earnings, and especially the extreme concentration of wealth, threatens values such as the merit principle and social justice in democratic societies, published in Paris, Seuil 2013. The rates of progression vary according to periods. However, whatever the period chosen, the structural rate of progression of the highest patrimonies or fortunes always appear much more rapid, at least twice as rapid than the growth of average revenue, average wealth accumulation. The rate of disparity, according to him, is spectacular. I need to conclude by explaining that education and justice have been mainstays in my life experience. I have always been renewed and inspired by my educational endeavors. Justice, human rights, equity, and peace have become now more popular pursuits, with women in all classes and countries, and with students and young people, racialized minorities, and members of the majority community. Recent studies interpret the concept of race as unscientific and as a social construct or perception which continues to perpetrate discrimination. As you can see, I am jumping over passages, but which I think sometimes add some balance to my presentation. However, I realize the sun is shining, and the reason we are here this afternoon is to honor you. I conclude, as I was myself taught, that the only realist is the optimist. History unfolds, not in a straight line, but advances nevertheless. And I encourage you to choose right over might. You know that our Canadian refugee policy has been studied by other countries because we've been inclusive in including collectives and groups of people who wish to involve and sponsor refugees so they may have a better life among us. Finally, without exhausting a list, those of you involved in environment are challenged by the recent withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement to combat climate change. Each of you with your legal training is enabled to detect and intervene in different ways. Education, justice, distribution of wealth, and peace. Indeed, all are intertwined. Let me say that I endorse the ringing message of Chancellor Meehan for compromise and tolerance, and your Vice Chancellor's call to an inclusive society. I thank her for her kind words. We have noticed also your leadership, Vice Chancellor Fortier, in creating the independent investigator for sexual harassment complaints. Let me quote Audre Lorde, in conclusion, in her address to the Second Sex Conference in 1979, because it speaks truth and is appropriate in these circumstances for all of us. I quote, "Racism and homophobia are real conditions of all our lives in this place and this time. I urge each one of us here to reach down into that deep place of knowledge inside herself, and I add himself, and touch that terror and loathing of any difference that lives there. See whose face it wears. Then the personal and the political can begin to illuminate all our choices. Good luck to you. May the sun continue to shine upon you and your families."